Before modern medicine figured itself out, doctors were out here burying people neck deep in dirt, injecting liquid gold into lungs, strapping dead animal intestines to foreheads, and calling it a Tuesday. And the scariest part? These weren't witch doctors in caves. These were licensed suit-wearing physicians who went to actual medical school, treating actual presidents and actual children, and every single one of these 49 treatments was considered completely normal. Smash that hype button right now, because what you're about to see will make you genuinely grateful to be alive in the 1 century where your doctor isn't about to shove a hot iron rod up your nose and call it a cure. 1. Doctors once prescribed smoking cigarettes to asthmatic patients because they genuinely believed smoke relaxed the lungs. A father handed his wheezing 10-year-old a lit cigarette on doctor's orders and felt like a responsible parent. Cigarette companies printed actual medical endorsements directly on the boxes. Nobody questioned it. Nobody stopped it. The lungs were not relaxing. The lungs were screaming. Medicine was thriving, apparently. 2. A physician handed an overweight woman a small pill and told her it contained a harmless supplement. It was a live tapeworm. The idea was the worm would eat everything she ate and she would lose weight effortlessly. She did lose weight. She also lost sleep and dignity and any future ability to eat a meal without wondering who else was enjoying it down there.
3. Victorian women visited male doctors complaining of mood swings and emotional outbursts. The doctor would nod seriously and diagnose them with hysteria. The treatment was exactly what you are thinking right now. This was written in medical textbooks. It was taught in universities. Husbands were sometimes billed for the appointments. The women left feeling confused. The doctors left feeling like heroes of science. Nobody involved questioned any part of this arrangement. 4. George Washington woke up one morning feeling unwell. His doctors arrived with serious expressions and serious bowls. They drained pints of blood from his already weakening body to balance his humors. They did it again, then again. Washington did not recover. Washington died. His doctors stood around the body nodding at each other professionally, and the man survived a revolution only to be finished off by the people he trusted most with his health. 5. A surgeon once told a deeply depressed patient that the problem was not in his mind but in his intestines. He then removed a portion of those intestines with full confidence. Thousands of these operations happened before a single colleague raised a hand and asked whether this actually worked. The answer was no. The patients were not less depressed. They were, however, significantly shorter on the inside than before. 6. A young child with a persistent cough was brought to the doctor by his worried mother. The doctor nodded and led them to a special chamber. Inside the chamber, they burned cow dung. The child inhaled the thick fumes as treatment for whooping cough. The mother stood outside trying to decide whether this felt like medicine or punishment. It was called dung fumigation therapy. It was written in prescription pads like it was completely normal. 7. An aging man walked into a Kansas clinic desperate to feel young again. Dr. John Brinkley looked him over and offered a solution involving goat testicles. Surgically transplanted goat testicles. The man agreed. Thousands of men agreed. Brinkley performed these operations for years and became incredibly wealthy. The goats had very mixed feelings about the entire industry. The men reported feeling revitalized. Medical historians reported feeling deeply unsettled reading about all of it. 8. A young boy was brought in for minor eye surgery, and the doctor reached for the cocaine eye drops without hesitation. Not metaphorical cocaine, actual cocaine. Dripped directly into a child's eyes as standard anesthetic. This was recommended in medical journals well into the 1900s. Parents signed consent forms. Pharmacists stocked the shelves. Everyone involved felt they were being very modern and responsible about the whole situation. 9. A tired woman visited her physician complaining of fatigue and pale skin. He diagnosed her with tired blood and prescribed the treatment with complete seriousness. She was brought to a barrel filled with other people's urine. She was told to sit inside it. She sat. She soaked. She left smelling like a decision she deeply regretted. Her blood remained tired. Her spirit was significantly more tired than before the appointment. 10. A syphilis patient sat nervously in a clinic hoping for a cure, and the doctor entered with a very specific plan. He would give the patient malaria. On purpose. Intentionally. The thinking was, one fever would simply cook out the other fever, and both would cancel each other out. The patient now had two serious illnesses. The doctor considered this progress. This approach actually won a Nobel Prize in 1927, which says everything about 1927. 11. A deeply unhappy man visited his surgeon hoping for emotional relief. The surgeon listened carefully and then removed most of the man's stomach. He called it digestive realignment therapy. The theory was that happiness lived somewhere near the duodenum, and removing the surrounding area would free it. The man woke up from surgery still sad, also extremely hungry. The surgeon wrote the results up in a journal and called the outcome promising. 12. See, a balding uncle arrived at the clinic clutching a newspaper advertisement promising full hair restoration. The doctor strapped a vacuum machine directly to his head and switched it on. The scalp turned purple, then darker purple. The uncle sat perfectly still because the doctor seemed very confident. He left with no new hair and a head that looked like it lost a fight with a plunger. The doctor scheduled a follow-up. 13. A cholera patient lay suffering when the doctor arrived carrying a very specific kit. The tobacco smoke enema kit. A pump was inserted and cigarette smoke was delivered directly into the patient in a direction that nobody had previously considered medically relevant. An entire device was invented specifically for this purpose. It had a name, it had instructions. It was used on real human beings by people who went to medical school. 14. A perfectly healthy and very opinionated young woman went to see her Victorian physician after her husband grew tired of her strong views. The doctor diagnosed her with ovarian irritation. The cure was surgical removal of both ovaries. She came out quieter. The husband was pleased. The doctor felt he had done excellent work. Modern medicine looked back at this specific entry in the textbooks and needed a very long moment to process it. 15. An elderly man arrived complaining he could no longer hear properly. The doctor examined him carefully and reached for a container of boiling oil. He poured it directly into the ear canal with the confidence of someone who had done this before. The man left unable to hear anything at all. The doctor recorded this as a completed treatment. The ear had not been fixed. The ear had been retired permanently from service. 16. A woman with swollen and painful joints was told by her physician that the cure involved sitting inside a glass case. A glass case filled with live ants. She sat inside it. The ants did not sit calmly. She left with arthritis and approximately 400 new problems. The doctor explained that formic acid from the ants would reduce inflammation. The inflammation was not reduced. The screaming, however, was significantly increased during the session. 17. A young man arrived at the hospital with a severely locked jaw. The doctors gathered and discussed options seriously. Their chosen option was buckets. Buckets of ice-cold water poured from a great height onto the patient repeatedly, or this was called the shower of surprise. The patient was definitely surprised. His jaw remained locked. His dignity did not survive the number of people standing above him with buckets looking extremely focused and medical about it. 18. A surgeon in the 1700s was considered talented based entirely on speed. The faster he cut, the better the doctor. One surgeon amputated so quickly during a rushed operation that he also removed the wrong leg. Then, a finger from his assistant. 3 people connected to that single operation did not survive. He was still considered one of the best surgeons in the country. The speed record stood for years. 19. A woman arrived with a severe migraine and left with a memory she could never explain to anyone at a dinner party. The doctor strapped a live electric catfish directly to her forehead. The catfish was not happy. The woman was not happy. The migraine remained completely unbothered. The doctor took detailed notes and felt the session showed real potential. The catfish was retired from medical practice shortly after, but not soon enough. 20. A diabetic patient sat across from his physician, describing intense sugar cravings. The doctor leaned forward with great confidence and prescribed more sugar, spoonfuls of it, daily. The thinking was that cravings obviously meant the body was requesting what it needed. The patient followed the instructions carefully. The patient got significantly worse. The doctor reviewed the notes and simply prescribed additional spoonfuls. Nobody in that entire clinic owned a single book about how diabetes worked. After 21. A young man who stuttered walked into a surgeon's office expecting speech therapy. He left with a significantly smaller tongue. The surgeon had cut triangular chunks directly out of it with scissors, believing the tongue was simply too large to move efficiently. The man's speech did not improve. His ability to eat soup was also permanently affected. The surgeon published his findings with great enthusiasm, and other surgeons read it and thought that sounded reasonable. 22. An older gentleman arrived at his doctor complaining of stomach parasites. The doctor reached under the counter and handed him a bottle. Not medicine, gasoline, a specific brand. Recommended like a good vintage wine from a knowledgeable sommelier. The patient drank it as instructed because the doctor had a diploma on the wall. This was happening regularly well into the 1920s. The parasites may or may not have survived. The stomach lining absolutely did not. 23. A nervous and anxious young woman was referred to Dr. Walter Freeman. He asked her to lie back and relax. He then inserted an ice pick through her eye socket and snipped the nerves connecting her frontal lobe. She could not feel it happening. Freeman did this exact procedure 3,500 times. He drove between hospitals in a vehicle he called the lobotomobile. He considered himself a pioneer. He was not wrong about that specific part. 24. A man stepped off a train feeling slightly shaken from the journey. His doctor diagnosed him immediately with railway spine. And this was a real diagnosis in Victorian medicine for people who felt nervous after train travel. The prescribed treatment was electrical shocks delivered directly to the spine twice every week. The man arrived anxious about trains. He left anxious about trains and also about Tuesdays and Fridays specifically. The doctor considered the treatment ongoing and very necessary. 25. An old woman arrived at the eye clinic with worsening glaucoma and pressure building behind her eyes. The surgeon examined her carefully and reached for a jar. Inside the jar were leeches. He attached live leeches directly onto her eyeballs to drink the pressure out. She sat completely still because moving seemed inadvisable given the situation. The pressure was not resolved, so the leeches were, however, extremely committed to their assignment and finished every last drop they could find. 26. A teenage boy was brought into surgery with an infected wound on his arm. The doctor packed the wound with fresh cow manure because he believed manure carried healing warmth into damaged tissue. The boy's mother nodded because the doctor said it with such authority. Patients died by the thousands from this exact treatment. The doctor continued applying manure to open wounds with full confidence and zero awareness that bacteria had recently been discovered by someone else. 27. A soldier returned from battle deeply traumatized and unable to function. His doctor listened carefully and then injected saline solution directly into his spinal column. The soldier's entire body went into violent convulsing muscle spasms immediately. The doctor pointed at the spasms and called them the cure. He wrote this up as a breakthrough treatment for wartime depression. The soldier survived the battlefield only to spend his recovery strapped to a table being violently spasmed back to wellness. 28. A Victorian family took their young daughter to the dentist with a small cavity. The dentist filled it carefully with lead. Not a small amount. Enough lead to slowly leach into the jawbone over the following years and work its way steadily toward the brain. This was standard dental practice. Parents thanked the dentist warmly on the way out. The dentist polished his tools and felt he had done a thorough and responsible job for the family. 29. A woman who stuttered was taken to a surgeon who examined her throat with great concentration. He identified the problem immediately, the uvula, that small dangling piece of tissue at the back of the throat. He removed it surgically and sent her home confident the stuttering would resolve. It did not resolve. She now stuttered and also had a strange sensation every time she swallowed for the rest of her life. The surgeon moved on to his next uvula with zero hesitation. 30. A typhoid patient was carried outside by nurses on direct doctor's orders and placed into a freshly dug hole in the ground. Only his head remained above the surface. He sat buried up to his neck for hours while the doctor explained that the soil would absorb the fever through osmosis. And the patient baked in the sun, wondering how his life had arrived at this specific moment. The fever was not absorbed. The worms underneath him seemed very confused as well. 31. A grumpy middle-aged man visited his surgeon complaining of a persistent bad mood that had lasted several years. The surgeon nodded thoughtfully and removed his gallbladder. A perfectly healthy gallbladder. He called the procedure temperament surgery and billed accordingly. The man woke up from anesthesia still grumpy. Also now missing an organ he had done nothing wrong. The surgeon reviewed the results and concluded the patient simply needed a second operation to finish the job properly. 32. A mother walked into a general store in 1920 and picked up a chocolate bar with a cheerful cartoon mascot on the wrapper. She fed it to her children as an energy treat. The chocolate was infused with radium, actual radioactive radium, marketed specifically for children's vitality between 1900 and 1938. The cartoon mascot smiled from the wrapper. The radium did not smile. It simply did what radium does quietly and thoroughly over a very long period of time. 33. A wealthy socialite was prescribed Radithor by his doctor as a premium energy supplement for distinguished gentlemen. He drank it enthusiastically and daily because it was expensive and therefore obviously effective. After some time, his jaw dissolved, not metaphorically, physically dissolved off his face. Doctors reviewed his case with great interest. Other wealthy patients quietly set their bottles down, and the company continued selling Radithor until the jawless socialite became too difficult to explain away at press conferences. 34. A tuberculosis patient arrived hoping for something that would help his lungs recover. The doctor prescribed gold, injected directly into the bloodstream, not because there was any evidence, but because gold was expensive and impressive, and medicine in the early 1900s respected both of those qualities enormously. The patient's lungs remained tubercular. His bank account was also significantly affected because gold injections were not covered under any reasonable definition of affordable healthcare at the time. 35. A young woman was brought to a psychiatrist who examined her teeth with unusual focus. He declared the teeth were poisoning her brain through hidden infections. He pulled every single healthy tooth from her mouth with complete confidence. She left toothless and still mentally unwell. The psychiatrist considered this phase 1. Thousands of psychiatric patients across America lost all their teeth to this theory before someone finally pointed out that the teeth and the brain were not having that conversation. 36. An epileptic teenager was brought to a hospital by his desperate parents who had tried everything. The doctor picked up a drill. He drilled a hole through the boy's skull while he was fully conscious, and then poured ice water directly onto the exposed brain. The parents waited outside, believing this was the cutting edge of modern neurology. It was not the cutting edge of anything good. The boy survived. The hole was permanent. And the epilepsy continued unbothered by the entire experience. 37. A woman diagnosed with schizophrenia was lowered into an ice bath by 2 nurses on direct medical orders. She was kept under until she lost consciousness completely. The doctor then stood over her with a stopwatch timing how long it took her to wake up. He called this her diagnostic score. A longer unconsciousness meant a worse prognosis. She woke up freezing and confused every single session. The doctor recorded her scores in a leather notebook like he was tracking athletic performance. 38. A man visited his doctor requesting something for constipation and left with a mercury prescription so powerful it deserved its own warning label. His teeth fell out within weeks. His gums turned black and began pulling away from the bone, and he returned to the doctor to report these developments. The doctor reviewed the symptoms carefully and prescribed slightly more mercury. Nobody in the medical community paused to connect the dissolving mouths to the thing they were all prescribing for constipation. 39. A psychiatric hospital in the early 1900s connected a troubled patient's veins directly to the circulatory system of a mentally healthy volunteer. The doctors believed sanity was literally contagious through blood and would simply transfer across. The troubled patient remained troubled. The healthy volunteer left considerably less enthusiastic about volunteering. The doctors published their findings with great optimism. Other hospitals read the findings with great interest. The patients involved read nothing because nobody asked them anything at any point. 40. A young woman walked into a pharmacy and purchased a small bottle of complexion wafers from a friendly pharmacist who recommended them warmly. She took one daily for clearer skin as instructed on the label. The active ingredient was arsenic. Daily arsenic tablets sold openly at pharmacies like vitamins. Her skin may have briefly appeared clearer. Everything else about her internal situation was quietly and systematically falling apart, while the pharmacist restocked the shelf cheerfully for the next customer. 41. An older gentleman with a heart condition was told by his Victorian physician to inhale chloroform regularly to relax the heart muscle between beats. Not in a hospital, at home, recreationally, like a hobby. Or the man sat in his armchair each evening inhaling chloroform as prescribed, while his wife knitted nearby pretending this was a completely normal household routine. His heart was not relaxed. His heart was deeply concerned. His liver was also filing a formal complaint nobody would hear for decades. 42. A heavy-set woman visited her surgeon seeking help with her weight and left with her jaw completely sewn shut. Both sides, fully sealed. The surgeon handed her a box of straws and called it the responsible medical option. She spent the following months consuming everything through a thin plastic tube while attending dinner parties and nodding at food she could not access. The surgeon reviewed her progress monthly and considered the results very encouraging from his side of the room. 43. A man arrived at his doctor's office with chronic constipation and left with surgical consent forms for full colon removal. The surgeon removed the entire colon and replaced it with a rubber tube. He described this to the patient as a permanent upgrade. The man lived the remainder of his life with rubber tubing where his large intestine used to be. The surgeon gave interviews about the procedure. He called it revolutionary. The rubber tube had no comment. 44. A teenage girl arrived at the clinic sneezing violently every spring with hay fever so severe it consumed her entire face. The doctor reached for a long, thin iron rod that had been sitting in a flame. He inserted the white hot rod up each nostril and cauterized the interior lining of her nose as a quick outpatient procedure. She left with no hay fever and also no functional nose lining to speak of. The doctor scheduled her for a follow-up and called it a clean result. 45. An old man arrived at the physician complaining of terrible headaches that had persisted for months. The doctor picked up a drill and made a hole in his skull to release the evil spirits causing the pain. The man survived and returned with another headache. The doctor drilled again. This happened multiple times. The man eventually had a small collection of holes in his skull which he showed to neighbors with a complicated mixture of pride and confusion. The evil spirits remained unlocated throughout. 46. A young mother desperate for her son to finally sleep through the night visited the physician who prescribed a very specific remedy. She was to take warm, freshly slaughtered animal intestines and strap the entire bag directly to the child's head at bedtime. She did this, in the dark, alone, questioning every decision that had led her to this specific parenting moment. The child did not sleep better. The mother did not sleep at all. The intestines completed their assignment without complaint. 47. A father brought his young son to the doctor after years of bedwetting had exhausted the entire household. The doctor listened carefully and prescribed raw onions. Large quantities of raw onions eaten every single evening, because onions were believed to strengthen the bladder walls from the inside. The boy ate onions nightly for months. The bedwetting continued on its original schedule, completely unbothered. The only lasting medical outcome was that no other child at school would sit near him anymore. 48. A grandmother with chest problems visited her physician in the early 1900s and was handed a bottle of heroin syrup for her heart condition. Bayer Pharmaceutical Company sold it in the same catalog sitting right next to regular aspirin, like it was simply another sensible option for the household medicine cabinet. She took it as directed. She felt surprisingly wonderful about everything for a while. Then she felt she needed slightly more of it. Then considerably more. Then the catalog made a lot more sense. 49. An uncle with genuinely terrible breath visited doctor after doctor seeking relief. The first surgeon removed his tonsils. The breath remained. The second removed his adenoids. still there. E3 removed portions of his soft palate in a separate operation. The breath persisted with remarkable stubbornness. The doctors gathered and reached a formal medical conclusion. His soul was simply corrupt. They wrote this in his file. He went home with 3 fewer throat parts and the same breath and a diagnosis that raised significantly more questions than it answered. So there you have it. Doctors once dissolved jaws with radioactive water, drilled holes in skulls for evil spirits, and prescribed daily arsenic for glowing skin. Medicine was basically just confident guessing with sharp tools and 0 consequences. If you survived any of this, you genuinely deserved a trophy. If this video made you grateful for modern healthcare or just deeply uncomfortable, smash that like button. Try to subscribe to BrainFumble and hit the bell so you never miss another reason to distrust historical science. Now tell us in the comments which treatment would you have absolutely refused, even if your doctor swore it worked.